Church, thank you for the chance to learn from your word this morning. Amen.
Thank you to our team, and I sure pray that you find victory from your Egypt as well today. Tremendous song there. Hey, a couple of announcements to make you aware of, a couple of upcoming events, and then you'll hear from some folks here in a moment that are directly impacted. This Wednesday is a special part of our All-Stars program. Every Wednesday, All-Stars in 212 at our youth building in town, grades 7 through 12. And the student band here plays about every week there. And I was thinking during this service what great music they have on Wednesday nights there. And then out here, age preschool through 6th grade is called All-Stars. And as part of All-Stars, at the end of September, we present quite a fun event for the kids, Junior Ninja Warrior. And Caleb Richardson works very hard on a lot of obstacles out on the backfield. The preschoolers have obstacles in a classroom. And just wanted to make you aware of it. We typically have more kids come, and our leaders are all on board and working in various ways. And Junior Ninja Warrior, it's a fun time, a great event for kids, and allows us to reach maybe more students and families than we typically reach. So I'd ask you to be praying about it, not just for safety for the kids, just that God allows us to reach some folks this Wednesday night. Also, we're going to begin a new session of our grief support group, and we're going to start that on Tuesday night, October 4th. If you or someone you know could benefit from having a guided conversation around the subject of grief, if there's recently been a loss in your life or someone you know, we'd sure be glad to invite you to that group. 7 o'clock, we meet in the great room, which is to your left, and talk through a lot of different things. And we've seen people benefit from that guided conversation. Big thanks to Kenny Otto, who is the co-leader with me in that, and the help that he provides. Over the years, the last 15 years or so, First Baptist Church has really taken initiative when it comes to the subject of adoption and foster care. Whether it's providing classes and encouraging foster families, foster care, providing some meals and such that we do at Faith in Action, and other care that we would provide for foster families, we also have gotten behind adoption in a very significant way. In the book of James, chapter 1 and verse 27, it says, "Pure and undefiled religion is this, to visit the orphans and the widows in their trouble, and to keep one's self unspotted from the world." And over the years, we've sought to take that verse serious to minister to widows and to orphans. And we've presented on 3 occasions, and we're going to do that again here in a few weeks, a 4th occasion, a Both Hands project, where we serve an orphan and a widow. And there's a lady in church, Deborah Dawson, that we're going to gather a team of people, and we're going to stain the outside of the log cabin, the log home that she's in, some other yard work and cleanup, subsequent to her husband's death last December. But if in the same process, we're going to ask our team of folks that serve in that to help raise funds toward the adoption of a child. Jacob and Shauna Goff are in the process of adoption. They've been going through the home studies and the psychological evaluation and such. And in past years, prior to the Goffs' efforts at adoption, First Baptist Church has raised more than $50,000 to help fund adoptions from 2 different families. Very significant investment. So what's going to happen? One, we're going to have Jacob and Shauna come up and share their vision and their heart for their adoption process here in just a moment. But if you'd have interest in serving in that work project and being part of the fundraising, and we're going to have a quick meeting right after this service in the great room. We'd invite you to come right away over there, and we're going to have a meeting for a few moments to explain how the fundraising works, how the work project works, And we invite you to be a part of that. They've got their small group on board and another small group, a Connect group they've been talking with. And we thought we would put it out to the congregation if you want to be a part of that. And there's not any commitment or obligation if you come to the meeting. We'll explain it, and then you can see if that's something that you want to do. The work project would be done on Saturday, October 15th. And so coming up here very, very soon. So I've asked Jacob and Shauna to share a bit of their heart about it. And then when they're finished, we've got a video to play from a past Both Hands project. And you may recognize some folks that are part of that Both Hands project. And that project raised about $30,000, the previous one, for adoption. And I just love our church gets behind that, does something to serve the orphan and the widow. Jacob and Shauna.
Morning, church. As Joe said, my name is Jacob, and this is Shauna. We are very, very excited about what God has in store for us, and we're in the process right now, and really the very middle of our adoption process. We're adopting a child from Colombia. Some of the questions that you guys have been asking is, do we know of our child yet? There's a lot of unknowns still, boy or girl, how old this child is going to be. There's a lot of things that we're still early in that process, but very, very excited for where God's headed with us and this child. And so we're very humbled to stand in front of you and partner with you. And we just wanted to share our hearts a little bit of, why God laid adoption in our hearts.
So for me, I feel like even when I was young, I just felt like adoption was such a picture of what Christ has done for us. And so it just kind of was always a part of the picture I had in my head when I pictured my own family when I was growing up. And so then in meeting Jake, and both of us having a similar vision for that, and then also adoption just being a part of Jake's story as well, then together we kind of moved forward with that idea in our heads, and then here just recently it's become something that we've been able to realize, especially through the generosity of our church. And so we started the process around June. Currently we're about to wrap up our home study, which is a really big part of it, and then moving into our dossier, which is a fancy French word for lots of paperwork. And that document will get sent over to Colombia, and then they'll kind of put us in their bucket of families who are waiting for a child. So that's kind of where we're at. And we've been asked the question a lot, what are your motivations for adopting? And I think that there can be a lot of reasons for why people want to adopt, but as simply as I could put it, there are kids out there that need homes and they need to hear about Jesus, so why not us?
Why not us, exactly. So as Shauna said, part of my story is I was adopted at 3 years old from who I know as my mom. My dad took himself and my brothers and I out of a really kind of hard situation, and we really wouldn't be standing here. My kids would not be my kids if my dad didn't make that decision and my mom didn't make that decision that day, and that's been super impactful on me. But really there was one point that God really turned my heart towards adoption, and it would have been at Village of Hope, which we're headed to in spring break soon, in 2018. I said something really, really dumb, and if you know me, that's probably not a rare thing that happens. But I was sitting there in the evening time, we were just talking, and we were kind of like excited because Shauna and I had kids pretty young, got married pretty young, and I said, I'm really looking forward to my 40s because I'm going to have them free. And multiple people in that room were like, that was really dumb. You know what I mean? God's going to do something with you. And he legitimately broke me there as I was watching orphans who needed homes. And then coming back and speaking with Shauna and speaking with our church family, and you guys got to hear from me on the mission trip report. I think from that moment, it really became very serious in our life. And as Shauna said, why not us? We have an issue in our world where life is not taking it the value it should be. And we want to be working towards a solution. And the best solution that I can come up with is to take kids out of hard places who need families. And so we're asking you guys to partner with us. And one of the cool things that's been happening to us through all of this process, a lot of people with fancy titles ask us really hard questions, or what they think are going to be hard questions. And we've been very prepared for those questions, but the one that I've been able to answer the easiest is, do you have a community of people that are going to help support you? And every time I smile and say, you would not believe the support that we have. Not only are multiple families in our church have adopted, we also have a church who has stood behind us, a community that will stand behind us as our kids are raised in the values that we share with our community. And so that's why we're inviting you guys to come along, because we've seen what God has done in the lives of families already in our church, and we're excited to see what God is going to do in our life and the life of this church as our kiddo goes through All-Stars in 212 and becomes a part of this community, that it's not going to just be us, but it's going to be you guys as well. So if you would not mind coming across and hearing the information in the great room right after this, we would be very humbled and blessed if you're a part of our process and get to be joining our team. Thank you.
Fundraiser. All the workers you see have sent letters out to their friends asking them to sponsor them for the day while they work. All the money that's sent in will go towards the adoption fund because all the supplies have been donated by local merchants. So 100% of the money that people send in goes towards the adoption fund. So it's a beautiful thing. The widow gets blessed, an orphan is brought a little bit closer to home, and all the volunteers have a chance to give their life away for a day. I think you'll enjoy it.
I'm Christina.
And I'm Cody.
And we're the Black family.
Adoption is something very close to our hearts. About a year ago, we began to pray about it, and God began to open doors, and we knew we were starting our family through adoption.
After our first couple of team meetings, we were so excited to have this group of family and friends that would come together and not only raise awareness and support for our adoption, but to also help a widow in need. We just can't wait to bring our child home into our family and also into this church family and community with such generous and loving hearts.
I see the weary, the widows and orphans. How can I not be moved to help them? I see the hungry and I see the hurting. It's time to stop waiting here and watching.
Okay, we're here at Lois's house, and we feel so honored just to help Lois with all of her projects.
And we're just so blessed to be surrounded by an awesome group of friends and family that came today to give their time. And we're just so thankful to Lois that we were able to come and help her and her help us. So thank you for all your support.
I'm just glad they came and helped me, and I love my house. That's all I have to say.
To every single nation, we want the world to know. There's no one like you, Lord. Every nation is yours. 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 Every nation is yours.
All right, man, that's a beautiful sight. All those people working hard, and they brought precious Gavin back from Eastern Europe. And when Gavin gave his life to Christ, we all got in on that. And the other 2 times that we've done that project and families that we've helped, we all get in on that. And that's kind of the invitation today. So, would you turn in your Bibles, please, to Exodus chapter 20. There's always 2 big questions when you see something that is, it's like ancient and it's man-made, and you think, how and why? How did they do that? And why did they do that? The pyramids would be one example of that. You look at those great pyramids of Egypt, and they go back 4,000 years ago. How did they do that? They didn't have hydraulic equipment. They didn't have cranes. How'd they do that? Do you know about the same time as those pyramids were being built, further north in England, was something called Stonehenge. Stonehenge is 4,000 years old, older than when Moses gave the Ten Commandments. Somebody carved out those stones, transported them, set them up. Those stones are 13 feet high, 7 feet wide. They weigh 25 tons. How did they do that? Without any sense of modern equipment 4,000 years ago. How did they do that? Stonehenge is aligned with the sun so that at the summer solstice, the beginning of summer, usually about June 21st, it all lines up perfectly. They did all that to somehow align with the sun as best they can tell. This prehistoric monument to the sun goes back hundreds of years before God said to Moses, don't make any carved image of anything that's in the sky or on the earth, in the water. They were already doing it in places around the world. We're in a series called The 10 Words. The 10 Commandments. In the Hebrew, the word for commandments is the word for word, the 10 words. And today we're at commandment number 2. And simply, commandment number 2 is to accept no substitutes. Don't worship anything that's carved or manufactured, that's created. So I want to read from Exodus chapter 20, the first 6 verses. The first 3 will be review from last week, and then verses 4, 5, and 6 are going to pick us up with the second commandment. Chapter 20, verse 1. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image, any likeness of anything that's in heaven above, or that's in the earth beneath, or that's in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children of the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. Now, anytime there's a command from God, it would be wise to ask, why is this here? What is it telling us about God that this is being revealed, that this is presented to us? Why is this here? And anytime you think about it at home, when you make a rule or something, it might be wise to ask, why is that a rule around this house? Why is that a law in the United States? Why is that a law in Kansas? Why can't you do this or that? Even if the law seems crazy, at some point somebody thought that was a good idea. Doesn't hurt to ask the question, why? When God gives commands, they're revealing to us. And in this case, it's revealing some things about idols, and it's revealing some things about God. For example, idols, one of the things we pick up from this, it reveals to us that idols are available anywhere you want to look. He says, don't make a likeness to worship of anything above the heavens, in the heavens, anything on the earth, anything under the earth. He said, anywhere you look, there's opportunities to make something to worship. Anywhere you want to look. The sky, the earth, the water. People can turn anything into an object of worship. And we have people worshiping nature, right? Trees and animals, the sun, whatever. People are worshiping all kinds of things. It's almost like the math equation. 2 + 2 = 4. How many wrong answers are there to that equation? Virtually unlimited number of wrong answers. And when we look at the distractions that could call people's attention or their devotion away from God, it's nearly limitless. Anything that calls our devotion and attention away from God. We're surrounded by opportunities that could pull us away from God. Now, the Israelites here had just come out of Egypt. They had just come out of slavery. And the Egyptians were worshiping all kinds of objects of nature. The sun, they were worshiping cattle and animals. They were worshiping the Nile River as it flowed through the lifeblood of the country, they thought. All kinds of things. And it just doesn't take much to get people's attention and time. They're available. Another thing about idol worship here is that it's progressive. He says, don't bow down to them or serve them. You see, one of the things about sin, idol worship, is it draws you in more and more. It costs you more than you expect to pay. It keeps you longer than you expect to stay. And it takes you further than you expect to go. And far too many people have gotten further down the line of sin. And then they one day are like, how did I get here? And why am I here? How did this happen and why? They're asking the same questions that get asked of the pyramids and Stonehenge and everything else. How did this happen and why? How did I get to this place in my life? This isn't where I thought I would be when I went for just this one time. This isn't where I thought I would be when it was just this once. Nobody's going to know. Nobody's getting hurt. Nobody's going to find out. So don't fall for the lie of just this once. Because idols, sin, are progressive. Not only that, it's contagious. It spreads, it affects. Now, God here said that he would visit the iniquity upon the children of the third and fourth generation. Now, a lot of people look at that and they're like, wow, God, what kind of cruel dictator is he that he's punishing children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren for the sins of their great-grandparents? What God's telling us there is not that he's going to blast somebody, your innocent children. What he's going to say is that the patterns and habits and mindsets of one generation affect the next generation. And there's a lot of kids here that are paying a price for how their parents have lived and the decisions that their parents have made. Ezekiel 18 is a very distinct passage that tells us that the children aren't responsible for the sins of the parents, and parents aren't responsible for the sins of their adult children. But it is a reminder. In fact, it's a great incentive for an individual to walk in faith because there's another generation coming along. Many times a parent hopefully would think, I'm doing this for you because I want my grandchildren to go to church. We're going to church today because I want my grandchildren to go to church. We're reading a Bible story tonight because I want my grandchildren to read a Bible story with their parents. Little eyes are watching. Little ears are listening. Little hands are copying. A powerful incentive that there's generations hanging in the balance, and the direction of those generations depends on, in a lot of ways, the habits and the mindset of this generation of us. Don't fall for the lie that your sin isn't hurting anybody. Nobody sins in a vacuum. There are implications. There's ripples. One more revealing thing about these idols here, and that is idols are very limiting. And here's what I mean by that. An idol is an attempt to limit God. In those days, somebody would carve the idol. They'd whittle it out and they'd carve it. And they'd set it on a shelf. And when they wanted God, they could go in and they'd have their God right there. And when they were done with them, they could just leave. And so we kind of do that today. There's a place out in Arizona that people go there, and it's the crystals, and they're in touch with nature and their spirits and such. But when they're done, they just leave, and then they can go live however they want. And when it's time to get in touch with the spiritual side of life, we just go back to that place. And so it's so limiting. And it's really an attempt for people to limit God. And if I'm choosing to limit God, who's in charge then? Who's the boss? That makes me the boss. Because I'm the one calling the shots. Instead of coming to God on his terms, I'm creating a God in my own image. I'm really only fooling myself. If God's confined to a nature or a building or a ceremony, then it makes me in charge, makes me in control. God says, don't make any image of me, because any image is going to be insulting. How many of you are proud of your driver's license photo? Can I see your hand? Is there anybody that got your driver's license photo and you're like, wow, can you do that in 8x10? Hey, where do we get more of those? I sometimes, and I actually smiled, I didn't smile, for a passport renewal yesterday morning. And I looked at the little camera and I'm like, how can that camera take photos that we all hate? How come none of us are ever proud of that? And what's the difference? We live in a culture that's bent on image management, making sure that we look good. Man, the social media world has everybody putting their best foot forward. I remember where I was when I learned this term, selfie stick. Now, I'm an old guy, technology, I'm one of the late bloomers when it comes to technology. But it was a mission trip to South Dakota, and somebody whipped out a selfie stick. What is that? Well, we're going to take a group photo right here. Look, and they held a stick up. Well, I remember where I was months ago. I'm walking through, some big boxed discount store from Northwest Arkansas. And so I'm going through there, and I see this box, and it says, selfie light. And I just start cracking up. Because you wouldn't want to take a selfie in bad light, would you? You have to get one of these, and Christmas is a couple months away. If you don't have a selfie light, what are you doing? What kind of image are you putting out there anyway? Selfie light. Franklin Roosevelt struggled in his mobility from polio. But he forbade any reporter or anyone from taking a photo of him in his wheelchair. He didn't want to look weak. He forbade any film footage of him transitioning into a vehicle or out of a vehicle. So I was fascinated some years ago when I went to the Franklin Roosevelt Memorial there in Washington, D.C., to see that he's sitting in a chair, not in his wheelchair. And it had just opened, controversy followed. And do you know that they've added a second statue of Franklin Roosevelt in a wheelchair to that memorial? And so it was the handicapped community or such that raised the issue, but it went against the image that he was trying to portray. Well, God said, any image that you create of me is going to be an insult. It's not going to work. I got a text a couple nights ago of a photo, of a picture that a second grader had drawn of a friend of mine. And they're like, here's the photo. What do you think? How's it look? Does it look like me? Now, it was a tremendous picture for a second grader. God said any picture, any creation that you make, any whittling, carving, anything you create in my image will be an insult because it's not going to look like me. So it reveals some things about idols. Don't make any carved image. Don't worship anything outside of God. But it also reveals us some things about God. For example, God says in verse 5, I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. Now, how many of that surprises you that God would call himself jealous? We usually think of jealous as I'm envious of something I don't have. I want something that's not mine. In fact, here in a matter of weeks, we're going to get to the 10th commandment, thou shalt not covet. What's coveting? It's I want something that's not mine. But when God says I'm a jealous God, he's conveying that he's jealous for what is his, what already belongs to him. Not too many years ago, I saw a movie about a man named Richard Carnes. And Richard Carnes, in the 60s, he was a college professor, part-time inventor, tinkerer kind of guy. And he figured out how to make intermittent wipers on cars. Some of us, if you were born, grew up before the 70s, before the 80s, you remember when wipers, you had two options, on and off. And now we have lots of glorious options when it comes to windshield wipers. So Richard Carnes invented intermittent wipers. And he took them to Detroit, and he began to go and give his ideas. And he made a presentation to one particular car manufacturer. And he laid out, and they were like, thank you very much, see you later, here's the door, here's your hat, what's your hurry? He was gone. A year later, Ford Motor comes out with intermittent wipers. And Richard Carnes goes back and he's like, what are you guys doing? You stole my idea. We don't know anything about your idea. Thank you very much. See you later. Here's your hat. And the story is Richard Carnes trying to get what's rightfully his. The invention that he invented. We have copyright laws so that people can protect what's rightfully theirs. God calls that jealous, where he's protecting what is his. If another man started buying my wife jewelry, I would be jealous, and rightly so. Because I would be protective of what is mine, my wife. God says, I'm jealous. And then he says, verse 6, but I show mercy to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. God shows steadfast love. He reveals that his commands are from a foundation of love. How often do we think that the commands of God are restrictive and confining, and God's trying to ruin your life, and he's trying to make my life difficult, and he just wants to take all the fun away. He's this cosmic kind of killjoy. And look what God's so restrictive. He's just binding our hands. No, he says, I'm operating from the basis of steadfast love and mercy. It's not antagonism. He's not out to get us. And so the instruction here is worship only one God. No one can serve two masters. He'll love the one and hate the other. He'll hate the one and love the other. So the first commandment prohibits worship of any other God. That's first commandment. Prohibits worship of any other God. And the second one prohibits worship of any version of God that's less than God. He's saying don't worship something that's lesser. Don't build your life on something that's inadequate, that's insufficient. Don't build your life on something that will let you down. Now, shockingly, tragically, between this audible presentation of the Ten Commandments, in verse 1 says God spoke all these things to Moses, and when God etched them on tablets of stone, which happened a few chapters down the line, the children of Israel, they assigned Aaron to build them a golden calf. God had already given the instruction, don't make any graven image. And Aaron builds this golden calf. What an insult to the Creator God. Did you ever wonder why he built a golden calf? Not a giraffe or a raccoon or a tree. The reason is that cow worship was all the rage in those days. The Egyptians had a god that was the cow, a god they worshiped the cows, and the Canaanites in the promised land where they were headed, they worshiped cows, the fertility god and such. So what Aaron did, what the people wanted, was a God that made them like everybody else. And Christians far too often just want a God that makes them like everybody else. When we talk about the scientific basis for creation, and then Christians come along and say, well, maybe those 7 days, maybe they were millions of years, and maybe God still used billions of years. And it's just, if I could just have a faith that's like everybody else, instead of adhering to truth, biblical and scientific truth. How insulting a golden calf is to the Creator God. It was small and God is immense. It was impotent and God is omnipotent. It was created and God is uncreated. It was capable of being destroyed, and in fact Moses destroyed that golden calf. God is indestructible. So there's some benefits to worshiping God. There's too many to list, but we'll list a few that we can draw out of this text. One, it keeps our focus on God. Keeps our focus on God. Secondly, is it keeps us from being controlled by temporary forces. The world around us isn't permanent. And if we build our life on anything around us, I mean, I like sports as much as the next person, and I'm going to watch a little football today, and I watched a little last night. But I couldn't give you scores from last season. I could hardly give you scores from last week. And we build our lives on things that don't last. It helps us hold our commitment. It holds us to our commitments when our focus is on God. And it provides a legacy of faith and values to our kids. What you do in your home is defining normal for your kids. So we have this opportunity to define what normal is. In pondering this image of God business, don't make an image of God because of who he is. It seems to me that God has reserved for himself the right to create in his image or to have his image propagated. There's 2 times in Scripture where it says explicitly, this is the image of God. One is the perfect Son of God, Jesus Christ. Jesus said in John 14 and verse 9, he who has seen me has seen the Father. And then in Colossians 1 and verse 15, it says, this is the image of God. Christ is the image of the Father. So that would seem like, rather than looking for something to devote ourselves to, we know who's there. Let's start getting to know the real image of God, Jesus Christ. And then there's another area where God reserved the right to define his image, and that is in Genesis chapter 1. He said, let us make man in our image. In the image of God, he made them male and female. We don't make images of God, but God intends for human beings to become the image of God. In Romans 8 and verse 29, for whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. And so the PowerPoint thought today, let's get to know the real image of God, Jesus Christ. And let's start becoming the image of God that God intended for us. Our goal as believers in that full devotion to God is to say, I want to know how, and we know why he made us in his image. How do we do that? Let's pursue that. Would you bow your heads with me, please? God in heaven, I thank you that you made humanity in your image, but how sin has marred that image of God. And how we need the perfect image of God, Jesus Christ, his death and resurrection, his life and his death and his resurrection as the basis for our worth and our value. God, would you keep us from lesser things? In Jesus' name, amen. Stand with us, please. The band has taken their place. We're going to close with a song. When we get finished here, we'll need to stack up the chairs, but I invite you to slip as quickly as you can over to the great room if you're able or interested in learning more about the Both Hands Project. Thank you.
Let's sing with all we've got this morning. Praise the Father. Thank you so much.